Neighborhood Network, in partnership with the League of Women Voters of New York State, presents Race to Represent, a MNN election initiative. Hello, I'm Dr. Christina Greer, and this is Race to Represent. Today, we're going to bring you an interview with New York State Senator Brian Benjamin. The New York State Senate is the upper house of the New York State Legislature. There are 63 New York State senators representing districts across the state. Legislative authority and responsibilities of the New York State Senate include passing bills on public policy matters, setting levels for state spending, raising and lowering taxes, and voting to uphold or override gubernatorial vetoes. These officials serve a 2-year term, and there are no limits on the number of terms they can serve. This year, all 63 seats are up for election. State Senator Brian Benjamin is the incumbent, having been in office since he won a special election in 2017. He represents District 30 that covers Harlem, East Harlem, El Barrio, the Upper West Side, Washington Heights, Hamilton Heights, and Morningside Heights. As of this interview, he is running unopposed. Today, he joins us to discuss his freshman year in the New York State Senate and his vision for his next term. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you.
I should, full disclosure, you are my state senator. We're so happy to have you here. I have just some questions about Albany and,
Sure.
You know, you're going to possibly, hopefully, you know, start a new full term.
Thank you.
But you've been pretty productive in the past
Oh, well, thank
year.
you. That's very kind of you.
So let's just start here. New York has a budget of $168 billion.
Right.
Do you think that your district, which represents Harlem, East Harlem, Morningside Heights, as I mentioned before, do you think your district is getting a fair share of that budget?
It's a good question. I think that we do have some concerns about how the budget is fully allocated. Now, part of this does come back to the fact that the Democrats do not control the New York State Senate. And so when conversations are being had about budgetary matters, we're not really part of the conversation, and it's unfortunate. One of the things that I've been fighting for so hard was to help get Andrea Stewart-Cousins made the majority leader of the Senate, but at least be in a position where she can help negotiate on our behalf. But it's very tough politics, right? I mean, Carl Hastie in the Assembly has a lot of power and resources on that front, but then on the Senate side, we're kind of stuck. So. I like for us to have more resources. That's my intention. But right now, I don't believe that we do have what we need to have. I think that on the education side, there is $26+ billion that is coming, but I don't think enough goes to some of the districts that need it the most. And so that's one of the things that I want to fight for in the next session.
So you mentioned Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and
Correct.
so you're a Democrat.
Yes.
And right around the time you were elected, the Democrats in the state officially united when the IDC, the Independent Democratic Caucus, dissolved. How has it been navigating that dynamic with the IDC?
So right around the end of session, the IDC did come back. And to be frank, you know, we were so concerned about Trump and all of the attacks that he was bringing to our country in New York State. We just jumped right in and started working together. And I think that they were humble. And they just kind of came in, and we said, okay, wait a minute. Now we've got 31 Democrats. Simcha Felder was also a Democrat, but still caucusing with the Republicans. And then one of their Republicans left, Tom Croce. He just got on a Navy vessel and took off. So we were literally in a situation where we had 31 Democrats, 31 Republicans, 30+1, Simcha being the 31, and we were fighting tooth and nail on everything together. And so, you know, sometimes when you've had a fight with a family member, if there's a bigger threat, you forget about your fight to fight the bigger threat, and that's kind of how we operated. I was not around for 2011 and 2012 and the promises for 2014 and 2016, so I didn't have the same historical connections to how much the IDC disenfranchised the Democratic Party. But for the year that I've been there and for what I was looking to do in terms of trying to represent our district, the last couple of weeks of session were interestingly not dramatic in terms of our fights or what could have happened. There were a couple of moments that really could have gotten really problematic, but we kind of fought through those because there was a bigger issue at stake, stopping the Republicans from harming our state.
Great. Okay. Well, I think some of the viewers might be surprised to know that the machine was working as well as it was.
So I was one of the biggest anti-IDC members of my caucus. I mean, I got elected right after Trump, right? So my special election was the first real election in the state after Trump. And so the anti-IDC fervor and helping Republicans and being part of any coalition with Republicans really was part of my election. And I came in saying, listen, I'm swinging at them, right? And we got into a lot of fights, and there was a lot of bad blood between us. But I will say the last couple of weeks when they came back, we did work well together. Right. I was a little surprised, to be frank.
Okay.
But we worked well together, and I'm not supporting any of them because I do have concerns with how this all worked out. But obviously, I'm part of the agreement that Senator Stewart Cousins made to not endorse anyone against them, and we're all abiding by that.
Right, and we'll see what September 13 yields,
brings.
Because it seems like the 8 members are in some pretty interesting and contentious primaries right now.
But listen. All elections are local, and I know that, it's like watching congressional races. Oh, we believe these things should happen generally, but each district is going to make a decision about who's been representing them. As you saw at the Crowley race, people make their own decisions, and we'll respect whatever decisions the people make. I'm
going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about school zone cameras.
Sure.
So this summer, the school zone cameras program became a big issue in the state Senate. The laws permitting a program that placed 140 cameras around school zones in New York City, and it expired in July.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents are concerned about this, as they should be.
Quite.
So it was a Department of Transportation program, and the report from the DOT claimed that it reduced speeding by 63%, and it was actually working. And it had a lot of support, and the session ended without a vote.
Correct.
And so the mayor and the governor and other state senators have been vocal about placing the blame at the feet of the Republican state Senate, saying that the Republicans won't bring it to the floor. And as you mentioned, Senator Felder, who is a Democrat, but he conferences with the Republicans, didn't allow the bill to move beyond the city's committee. So first question, where do you stand in the school zone cameras program? And the second is the infighting affecting your body's ability to govern?
So I believe, obviously, we should have speed cameras. I mean, that's. I don't think anyone who has, who's concerned about kids, concerned about schools, concerned about community safety, we all know it's a good program. But obviously, Simca Felder, in my opinion, wants some things to happen for the yeshivas. That's a big conversation right now. And has held the school cameras hostage. And what has now happened is, I believe that Senator Marty Golden has got some concerns in his district, and he is more interested in it happening now for his own purposes. And hopefully we'll get this done in a special session.
Right.
But when you say infighting, what do you mean?
Well, I think the fact that Senator Felder is a Democrat but caucuses with the Republicans, and that creates tension with other Democrats.
Well, it's all who has power and who doesn't, right? So John Flanagan can pull us into session, or the governor can, but we right now neither side can get anything done without the other, because they have 31, we have 31. So we have to agree on it, and I think if the pressure is put on some of the Republican colleagues who have their own special races to run, then we'll be back in session to do it, special session.
So something you said when you were running last year was that you strongly support a woman's right to choose and make her own health care decisions.
Correct.
And that you will work to pass the New York Reproductive Health Act.
Correct.
Do you still support that bill?
Yes.
And what's the holdup in the Senate?
You want me to come back to the same issue?
Right.
Yeah, look.
So, I mean, does everything essentially boil down to this 31-31? Is that kind of the, is that the big answer?
But the Republicans control the floor, right? So they control the locks to the doors, right? So we when you hear about that 3 men in the room thing, it's really real, right? I mean, so right now we can't have the Republicans control the state Senate and get any important bills passed. Mass incarceration, any mass incarceration is near and dear to my heart. I want bail reform. I want speedy trial reform. I want discovery law reform. I want to close Rikers. None of that stuff can happen unless John Flanagan and his conference agrees. And so we have to take control of the Senate, at which point we can work with Speaker Hastie and the governor to figure out the best way to pass progressive things as opposed to having progressive issues blocked or being part of trade-offs. They need to get this to give us that.
So let's move away from Albany. Let's
Okay,
come back downstate. What are you hearing from your constituents? And do you have a constituents office?
Of course.
And if so,
I hope so.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
I've never been there, so maybe I should just swing by. But can you tell the viewers where it is?
Yes, sure.
And what are you hearing on the ground? What are the primary concerns of the people in your district?
Sure. My district office is located at 163 West 125th Street. I'm on the 9th floor, Suite 912. It's basically 125th Street, on the corner of 125th Street and the corner of Adam Clay and Powell Boulevard.
Oh, wait, I
it's
have
the big
been there.
building. The state office building. It's a huge building, and I have a great staff. Most of our issues we hear about are housing. People worried about getting pushed out of their homes. People trying to find affordable housing right here in Harlem. It's a big issue, and we do deal with a lot of issues around incarceration, families, wrongful incarceration cases, people wanting to get their kids out of jail and prison. So we deal with those issues, but housing is the number one. Oh yeah, I mean it's the number one issue.
So you introduced the Neighborhood Integrity Act
Yes.
to help fight the rebranding of neighborhoods.
Correct.
Like calling Southern Harlem Soha.
Correct.
And that's one of the first fights that you took on. And so why was that the first fight? If housing
Yes.
is,
Sure.
kind of what you're hearing,
Sure.
why was that so important to you?
When you rename Harlem, parts of Harlem Soha, part of the argument around that, by the way, this was done by a real estate broker. Part
So
of the
it actually
argument,
does tie into...
There we go.
Okay.
So if someone believes Harlem stands for things that they find negative, for example, crime, the history of that, when you rename a part of it Soha, that's a whole new name. That just sounds interesting. It's different. And then we were hearing that from brokers who didn't like this happening, that the prices of the apartments and condos in Soha was getting higher numbers than Harlem. And so that in and of itself had real economic issues in terms of facilitating gentrification. But there's also an emotional issue around renaming blocks that are part of a history and a culture, and who gets to decide that? So part of the reason why we created the Neighborhood Integrity Act was to say, wait a second, if a neighborhood is going to get renamed, who gets to decide that? There should be a community conversation that is embedded in that, almost like you do a rezoning or a ULURP when it comes to land use issues. How can you rename a neighborhood and the community is not a part of that, and just someone with a lot of money gets to just kind of start naming something else? It's completely ridiculous. So we came up with this bill to do that. It was obviously spawned out of the effort to protect Harlem and the name Harlem and the culture and the history, but it was clearly around trying to make sure that we don't have random brokers who don't even live in the community getting to decide what the community is named. Why did I start with that? Well, when I was chair of the community board before I became senator, and this was a hot topic right at the end of my term, and so I was already in the fight as a community board chair. So when I became a senator, it just made sense to just hit the ground running. I knew the issue, I knew the concerns, and there was a tangible thing that I can do. I called Assembly Member Hakeem Jeffries because he had a similar kind of structure going on, a bill he was working on before he became a congressman, and said, hey, I'm concerned about this issue. I really want to focus on it. He said, I got the draft of something. Maybe you can take that and work with that. And that's what I did.
Okay, so let's talk about another bill you introduced.
Sure.
This one would curtail the mayoral control over schools, and it would require
all the
formal.
Easy ones you
Yeah, of
right
course.
into.
It's
Yeah,
like,
of course.
well, our viewers want, they want to hit the ground running. So you want to curtail mayoral control over the
Correct.
schools. It would require formal community input anytime the city wants to close or scale back a school. Can you tell us a little bit more about
Absolutely.
that?
So there is a school in our district called Wadley Secondary School, very well-known school at this point.
Okay.
There was a plan to truncate the school, truncate out the middle school. And my concern was that when you talk about truncating schools in districts, I want to make sure that these superintendents, primarily, and the DOE, that they are communicating with the local elected officials, the local community leaders, and I want to make sure that there's some kind of accountability as it relates to, if you're truncating a middle school, for example, well, did it have the right resources? Did you have the right leadership? What was the issues? What were concerns? Why why weren't we more part of the conversation in the beginning? And so that bill was to basically say, listen, before you go and make these decisions, I want us to have a formal hand in it, which would force the communication that I found was lacking as a new senator. And so that is the premise of it is we want to make sure that the DOE can administratively have a process that requires some of the things in my bill that they can just decide to do. We don't need to have a bill to do that. But I want them to take us seriously as community leaders and elected officials, because guess what? If a school gets closed and it shouldn't have been closed, we can't go to the mayor. He's too big. And quite frankly, at this point, he's term limited, right? But local communities come to us and say, listen, what are you doing? What's going on? And some schools should be truncated or closed or restructured. I am all for what's best for the kids. But the process for that, it's got to be inclusive of the community stakeholders who are left with the schools and this community when the DOE and the mayor go on to other things.
Right. Okay. You mentioned before about prison reform.
Yes.
And so you're a sponsor of a bill to close Rikers in 3 years,
Correct.
whereas the mayor has proposed 10.
Correct.
I mean, that's much faster than the city's plan.
Big difference, yes.
You also co-sponsored a bill to end solitary confinement.
Correct.
And you successfully pushed for New York State divestment from private prisons.
Yes.
And so you're doing a lot of work around the criminal justice system and bail reform.
Right.
So do you see these issues as a matter of economic injustices or racial inequality or both? And where do your bills stand right now on these issues?
So I see one of the reasons why I introduced bills is to help to move the conversation where I believe the conversation should go. Someone said to me, you're introducing a bill to close Rikers in 3 years. That's not realistic. I'm like, okay, is it? Why not? Let's have the conversation. I believe it is, right?
My grandmother used to say, we put a man on the move.
Yeah.
I think we can figure this out.
I believe it is.
Right.
I mean, I know land use. I used to build affordable housing before becoming a state senator. I know how long it takes to build buildings and to build jails and to build structures. Why can't we do it at this period of time? And then you start hearing all the mechanics, and then by the time you get to the bottom of it, wait a minute, why does it take you a year and a half to think about what the jail should look like? Why, right? And so I started playing with the math, and what we recognize is there are these baked-in assumptions that are not necessarily based on what's best for the community. It's based on what some consultant said someplace. And so I want to challenge that. And so that's part of the reason. And, you know, maybe it's not 3, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 5, but it's certainly not 10.
It doesn't have to be 10.
It's certainly not 10. And so that's my thought there. Where's that bill? That bill is stalled because obviously the Republicans would never look to pick up a bill like that. On the divestment from private prisons, let's be clear. The New York State pension funds, public pension funds, should not be facilitating private prisons, and that was a moral stance that I took. And now the comptroller agrees and has made this decision. But I believe morally, we cannot be incentivizing private prisons when their whole business is predicated upon having people in prison, okay? And so from a
largely from your district.
Think about the business development arm of a private prison. What do you do to help drum up revenue at a private prison? I don't even want to talk about it. You're bribing judges. You're doing all kinds of nasty things that we should not be a part of a society. We should be saying no to. So that was my argument now. And quite frankly, these young kids who are coming from across the border, who are separated from their families, where are their families going? Private prisons, right? So this is just heinous policy, and we don't want people making money off of that stuff. So I fought against that. The bill that hasn't moved, but the conversation moved because the comptroller made a decision to stop the divestment, which is a wonderful thing. And on some of our other bills, speedy trial, bail reform, and discovery law reform, they're stuck because we don't have a state senate that will make the right decision. But the governor's on board. The speaker, Carl Hastie, is fully on board. We just need the Senate to take hold and work together with those two partners. And when we get control of the state senate, we'll be able to do that.
Okay. So we're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask just a few quick questions.
Sure.
So you say that one of the priorities in community is community-based business.
Correct.
And so as in most neighborhoods in Manhattan, you can't help but notice all of these closed storefronts.
Absolutely.
In our district as well.
Right.
And so do you have any thoughts on how to attract and also keep local businesses and decrease some of these closings?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, we have commercial gentrification as well, and that's even more rapid than residential. We need to help fund and grow our local small businesses. I'm helping to do that with grants to nonprofits to help build our local businesses, help some of our small businesses grow. I mean, realistically, we need stronger local businesses that can compete in the marketplace, and that's the only way we're going to deal with this, because that's a private sector issue, and we can rant and rave all we want, but we've got to help our small businesses grow.
Let's talk about NYCHA.
Okay, sure.
You have the most NYCHA developments
I do.
than any state senator in New York. And so how do you even begin to deal with the state that your constituents are living in NYCHA housing? Because we've seen pictures, we've heard the stories. Some people know individuals who are in NYCHA housing. What do you think about NYCHA Next Gen neighborhood program?
Sure.
Recently, the mayor's office said nothing's off the table to chip away at the $32 billion in funds it needs to repair some of these buildings throughout the 5 boroughs.
Yeah.
And some people fear that that means the development of parking lots and green spaces and public housing. There's some tensions as to whether or not these are good things or bad things. So can you just sort of give us the landscape of kind of NYCHA in your district, and then what you're doing to to think about that?
So NYCHA, first of all, I come from a world where I believe that you have to solve problems, right? You don't just complain about a problem, try to solve it. My basic perception on the NYCHA issue is very simple. We have $32 billion of repairs that need to get done across the NYCHA portfolio. You're talking about 500,000 people. We do not have the resources allocated to do that from a state and city level. We don't have it, right? Now, the federal government has walked away from its commitment. Fine. What we have to do is have a massive rehab program we're doing some of that, right? But it's this program called RAD. We need to turbocharge this thing.
And does RAD stand for something?
I'm sorry, Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. And basically what it is, it's federal funds that come in as part of sort of these project-based financing structures that allow for significant renovations of buildings. We need to do it on 10, right? And I just don't think there's a plausible political answer around building market rate housing on parking lots. I just don't think we're not going to do it, right? And so let's rehab the buildings that we have now, and let's get the resources to do that. We've started to do that, but we need to do it on a much more aggressive basis. And to me, that's a plausible answer, because we're not going to build market rate housing on it. And if you build affordable housing on those lots, it's not going to generate anywhere near the amount of money to deal with the repairs. By the way, it's $32 billion and growing, because what happens is
it's not
when you
like
don't
we cap it here and we don't have winter coming and
right. Because when you don't fix the holes in the roof, that creates other problems, right? And it pains my heart, honestly. And I don't think we have a real political answer that can make sense besides just massive rehab investments where you work with private and nonprofit developers in collaboration with the city to rehab these apartments. It can be done. You just have to make the investment to do it.
And think sometimes creatively about how to do it as well.
Yeah. But putting market rate housing on NYCHA land, no one's going to go for it politically, and it's just going to be impossible to do structurally.
So in 2017, the Department of Aging report says New York City's senior population is growing bigger than ever, living longer than ever, and getting poorer than ever. So over 1.4 million New Yorkers are currently age 60 or older. By 2030, that number will rise to 1.8 million. And the Department for Aging estimates that in your district, roughly 37% of the people in your district are over 60 years old. How would you plan on supporting the needs of this growing number of senior citizens in the district?
I think, first of all, we need more affordable housing for our seniors. The demand is nowhere near what supply is providing, right? So we need to deal with that. But we also need to really look at SCREE and DREE and expand that. I'm sorry, good point. So it's a senior citizen rent exemption program and the rent increase exemption program. So basically what it says is, when you reach if you're on a certain income, your rent will only grow to you by a certain amount. Because we have a lot of seniors who are struggling with increasing rent costs, right? I mean, a lot of our seniors are in the private market, like many people are, and a number of them are the biggest targets of the landlords trying to push them out because their rents are so below market. And as you know, with our awful rent laws that we're going to fix in 2019 with the Democratic Senate majority, where you have incentives to push people out of their homes and raise the legal rent and do all this terrible stuff, and preferential rents, which is a whole nother topic for another time. They are the most vulnerable to those issues. And so we need to change some of our laws in Albany that impact them the most, but then we also just have to provide more affordable senior housing. And the mayor is focused on providing more affordable senior housing, but we just need to really turbocharge that as well and protect NYCHA.
So before I let you go, there are two things you're very proud of having accomplished in the last year. The SCAR Act, which is a bill to help children separated from their families and help in New York, and a methadone clinic on St. Nicholas. And you helped lead the effort to stop it from being installed in inappropriate location. That's what you did last year, amongst all the other bill introductions. What's next?
Look, for me, Janus versus AFSCME has created significant implications for our public sector unions. I come from a union family. My parents worked hard, fought to build a life for our family, and the union helped provide them with that lifestyle. We need to keep that going. I mean, that's how we're going to protect our working families. Talk about working families, those are our working families. So the Janus has caused a problem for us, and we need to come up with state solutions to make sure that our public sector unions can continue to collectively bargain on behalf of employees, and we're going to do that. So there's something that I'm working on with Assemblymember Gottfried to help create a new structure whereby instead of having the union employee do the collective bargaining or facilitate that through union fees and agency fees, doing something with the state or the employer. So it's basically have the union work with the employer, who is the state or the authority, as opposed to having a contract with each of the employees as it relates to the collective bargaining and some of the various union organizing costs that matter. So there are things that we can do to stop Trump locally. That's one of them, and that's a big one because every union is being impacted by what's going on. Every public sector union is being impacted by what's going on with Janus versus AFSCME.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Alrighty, and thank you for watching. Please remember to vote. A closed primary election will be held on Thursday, September 13th, and the general election will be held on November 6th, 2018. For more information on voting, locating your poll site, and all the candidates, you can visit our website, racetorepresent.com, or the League of Women Voters website, lwvny.org. Thank you for watching Race to Represent on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Bye-bye.